Detective Amanda Foster stood in the sub-basement of Roosevelt Elementary School, her breath visible in the damp, cool air as she examined the makeshift living quarters that had been hidden beneath the building for over 3 decades. The discovery had come about through a routine asbestos inspection, when environmental contractors found an unauthorized entrance behind the school's main boiler room. What they uncovered defied comprehension: a network of connected rooms where children had been living in secret since 1989, all under the protection of Leonard Moss, the school's beloved head janitor who had been saving troubled kids from the foster care system by giving them a home where no one would ever think to look. The investigation had begun 6 weeks earlier when 67-year-old Leonard Moss suffered a massive stroke while cleaning the school's gymnasium after hours. Paramedics rushing him to the hospital had been puzzled by his desperate, barely coherent pleas about the children and his insistence that someone needed to check on them immediately. Hospital staff had assumed he was delirious from oxygen deprivation, but his words troubled the EMT enough to file a report with Child Protective Services about possible unsupervised minors. Foster had been assigned to follow up on the EMT's concerns, expecting to find nothing more than an elderly man's confusion about neighborhood children he might have been helping with homework or odd jobs. Leonard Moss had worked at Roosevelt Elementary for 30 years, earning a reputation as someone who went above and beyond his custodial duties. Teachers regularly praised his willingness to stay late to help with school events, his gentle way with difficult students, and his uncanny ability to calm children who were having behavioral problems. The school's principal, Patricia Williamson, had been reluctant to allow a full investigation of the building. "Leonard is one of our most trusted employees," she had insisted during Foster's initial interview. "The children adore him, and he's prevented more suspensions and expulsions than I can count by taking time to talk with struggling students. If he's been helping some kids after hours, it's because he genuinely cares about their welfare." But Foster's training had taught her to look beyond surface appearances, especially when dealing with cases involving vulnerable children. Her review of school attendance records revealed a troubling pattern. Over the past 30 years, dozens of students with histories of behavioral problems, family instability, or involvement with Child Protective Services had simply stopped attending Roosevelt Elementary without any documentation of transfers to other schools or formal withdrawals. The pattern became more disturbing when Foster cross-referenced the missing attendance records with county foster care databases. Many of the children who had vanished from school rolls had been in the process of being removed from abusive homes or were scheduled for placement in group facilities. In the chaotic bureaucracy of the 1990s and early 2000s, before computerized tracking systems were fully implemented, children could slip through administrative cracks without triggering immediate investigation. Foster's breakthrough came when she interviewed Margaret Santos, a retired second-grade teacher who had worked at Roosevelt Elementary from 1985 to 2015. Santos remembered Leonard Moss with obvious affection, describing him as someone who had a special gift for connecting with the school's most challenging students. But when Foster pressed for specific details about children who had stopped attending school, Santos's recollections became more troubling. "There were several children over the years who just seemed to disappear," Santos admitted during their conversation in her tidy apartment overlooking the city park. "We would ask Leonard about them because he often knew more about the struggling kids than anyone else, and he would tell us they had been placed with relatives out of state or had moved suddenly with their families. It made sense at the time. These were children from unstable situations. But looking back, it does seem odd that it happened so frequently." Santos provided Foster with names and approximate dates, allowing the detective to begin constructing a timeline of disappearances that stretched back to 1989. The earliest case involved 8-year-old Marcus Williams, whose mother had been arrested for drug possession and whose father was serving time for armed robbery. Marcus had been living with his elderly grandmother when she suffered a stroke that left her unable to care for him. The last record of Marcus at Roosevelt Elementary was a disciplinary report filed by Leonard Moss for a playground altercation, after which the boy simply vanished from all official documentation. The environmental inspection that ultimately exposed Moss's secret had been triggered by the school district's preparation for a major renovation project. Contractors examining the building's structure had used ground-penetrating radar to map the foundation and identify potential hazards. The radar revealed voids in areas where solid concrete should have been, suggesting that unauthorized modifications had been made to the building's basement level. When workers broke through what appeared to be a concrete wall behind the boiler room, they discovered a carefully constructed entrance leading to a network of rooms that had been carved out of the building's foundation and expanded into the natural caves that ran beneath this part of the city. The spaces were surprisingly livable, with electricity tapped from the school's main system, running water connected to the building's plumbing, and ventilation that drew fresh air from the school's HVAC system. Foster's first descent into the hidden rooms revealed living quarters that told the story of decades of secret habitation. The main area contained several sets of bunk beds, study tables equipped with school supplies, and recreational spaces with games and books appropriate for children of various ages. The walls were decorated with artwork and school projects dating back to the 1990s, creating a timeline of the lives that had been lived in these underground spaces. Most remarkably, the hidden area included a fully equipped classroom where Leonard Moss had apparently continued the children's education while they lived beneath the school. Blackboards showed evidence of recent lessons in mathematics and reading, and filing cabinets contained homework assignments, test scores, and progress reports that Moss had maintained for each child in his care. The academic records revealed that many of the hidden children had actually improved their performance dramatically after disappearing from the school's official rolls. The discovery of 12 children currently living in the underground facility created an immediate crisis for Child Protective Services and law enforcement. The children ranged in age from 7 to 16, representing different eras of Moss's operation. Some had been living underground for only a few months, while others claimed to have been there for years. All of them referred to Leonard Moss as Papa Len and expressed genuine affection for the man who had given them sanctuary from troubled family situations. Foster found herself facing an investigation unlike anything in her 15-year career. The children were clearly victims of kidnapping by any legal definition, yet they showed no signs of abuse or neglect. Medical examinations revealed that they were well-nourished, properly educated, and psychologically stable. In many cases significantly better adjusted than they had been before disappearing from the official child welfare system. The oldest resident of the underground community was 19-year-old Sarah Mitchell, who had been living beneath the school since she was 11 years old. Sarah had originally run away from a foster home where she was being sexually abused, and Leonard Moss had found her hiding in the school building during a winter storm. Rather than turning her over to authorities who had failed to protect her, Moss had offered her shelter in the hidden rooms he was already constructing for other children in similar situations. "Papa Len saved my life," Sarah told Foster during their first interview, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "I would have died on the streets or gone back to people who were hurting me. He gave me a family when nobody else wanted me. We all took care of each other down there. The older kids helped teach the younger ones, and Papa Len made sure we had everything we needed." Sarah's testimony revealed the sophisticated system Moss had developed for managing his underground community. The children maintained regular schedules that included both academic instruction and practical life skills training. They grew vegetables in hydroponic gardens that Moss had constructed using equipment borrowed from the school's science department. They exercised in converted storage areas and maintained their living spaces with the same pride that Moss brought to his custodial duties above ground. The investigation revealed that Moss had spent decades carefully selecting children who would not be immediately missed by the official system. He had focused on kids who were aging out of foster care, those who had run away from abusive situations multiple times, and children whose families were too dysfunctional to maintain contact with schools or social services. His knowledge of the child welfare system's weaknesses had allowed him to identify vulnerable kids who could disappear without triggering intensive searches. Foster's interviews with former Roosevelt Elementary staff revealed that Moss had cultivated a reputation as someone who could reach the most difficult students. Teachers regularly sent troubled children to spend time with him when they were having behavioral problems, trusting that his patient approach could calm situations that traditional disciplinary measures couldn't resolve. This arrangement had given Moss regular access to vulnerable children while establishing him as someone genuinely concerned with their welfare. The physical evidence found in the underground facility painted a picture of a man who had devoted his life to caring for unwanted children. Personal journals that Moss had maintained since 1989 documented his reasons for taking each child, the circumstances that had led to their placement in his care, and his efforts to provide them with stability and education. The journals revealed a man tormented by the failures of the official child welfare system, but convinced that his underground sanctuary was the only way to protect vulnerable children. "The system is broken," one journal entry from 1995 stated. "I watched them place Timothy with 3 different families in 6 months, and each placement was worse than the last. When he came to me with cigarette burns on his arms and begged me not to send him back, what choice did I have? These children deserve better than what the state can provide them." The medical examiner's office was tasked with investigating reports of deaths within the underground community. Moss's journals acknowledged that 2 children had died from illnesses during his care, a 7-year-old with undiagnosed heart problems in 1997, and a teenager who had apparently suffered complications from diabetes in 2003. Both children had been buried in a small cemetery that Moss had created in a natural cave system connected to the underground facility. Foster's examination of the burial site revealed graves marked with simple headstones bearing the children's names and dates of death. The burials had been conducted with dignity and care, with personal belongings interred alongside each child. DNA analysis confirmed the identities of the deceased children, both of whom had been reported missing from the foster care system, but whose disappearances had not been thoroughly investigated due to bureaucratic failures and understaffing. The case presented prosecutors with an unprecedented legal challenge. Leonard Moss had clearly committed multiple felonies by kidnapping children and concealing deaths, but the circumstances of his crimes defied traditional categories of criminal behavior. The children in his care had been genuinely rescued from abusive situations, and many of them credited him with saving their lives. The underground facility, while illegal, had provided better care than many official foster homes. District Attorney Rebecca Chin faced enormous pressure from multiple directions as she considered how to proceed with charges against Moss. Child welfare advocates argued that Moss should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, regardless of his intentions, to send a clear message that vigilante justice would not be tolerated. But others pointed to the obvious failures of the official system and questioned whether prosecuting someone who had provided genuine sanctuary to vulnerable children served any legitimate purpose. The media coverage of the case divided public opinion sharply. Some viewed Moss as a hero who had stepped in when official institutions failed to protect vulnerable children. Others saw him as a criminal who had exploited his position of trust to take children from their legal guardians, regardless of his motivations. The complexity of the case made it difficult for the public to form simple judgments about guilt and innocence. Foster's investigation expanded to include interviews with children who had lived in the underground facility during earlier decades and had eventually left to live independent lives as adults. Tracking down these former residents proved challenging, as many had been living under assumed identities or had moved far from the area to start fresh lives. But those who could be located provided remarkably consistent accounts of their time in Moss's care. James Rodriguez, now 35 and working as a construction foreman in Denver, had lived in the underground facility from age 10 to 17. "Papa Lynn taught me to read properly," Rodriguez told Foster during a phone interview. "My mother was a drug addict who never sent me to school regularly, and I was way behind when he took me in. By the time I left, I had my GED and enough skills to get a job. I've been supporting myself ever since, and I've never been in trouble with the law." The pattern repeated across multiple interviews with former residents. Children who had been considered failures by the official education and welfare systems had emerged from Moss's care as productive adults with stable lives and strong work ethics. Many had gone on to pursue higher education or successful careers, and several had become advocates for child welfare reform based on their experiences. The psychological evaluations of the children currently in Moss's care revealed none of the trauma typically associated with kidnapping victims. Child psychologist Dr. Rachel Park, who interviewed all 12 children, found them to be remarkably well-adjusted despite their unconventional living situation. "These children show strong attachments to each other and to Mr. Moss," Dr. Park reported. "They demonstrate age-appropriate social skills, academic achievement at or above grade level, and emotional stability that is quite remarkable given their backgrounds." The investigation revealed that Moss had maintained extensive records of each child's medical care, educational progress, and psychological development. He had quietly arranged for medical treatment when needed, using false documentation to avoid questions about the children's legal status. Several children had received corrective surgery, dental care, and mental health treatment that they would never have received while in official foster care. Foster's review of Moss's financial records showed that he had spent virtually his entire salary on caring for the hidden children. Bank statements revealed regular purchases of food, clothing, educational materials, and medical supplies in quantities far exceeding what a single man would need. Moss had also borrowed money against his modest home to fund improvements to the underground facility and to pay for medical care that couldn't be obtained through official channels. The school district faced enormous liability concerns as details of the case became public. Parents and community members questioned how extensive modifications to the building could have gone unnoticed for 30 years. The investigation revealed that Moss had conducted his construction work gradually, using his access to the building during nights and weekends to slowly expand the underground spaces over decades. Moss had also exploited his position as head janitor to avoid scrutiny of his activities. His master keys gave him access to every part of the building, and his long tenure had earned him the trust of administrators who rarely questioned his presence in restricted areas. The gradual nature of his construction project, combined with his legitimate need to access the building's mechanical systems, had allowed him to work undetected for years. The children's integration back into mainstream society proved challenging for Child Protective Services. Many of the younger children had never lived in conventional homes and struggled with the transition to traditional foster care. Several of the teenagers were old enough to petition for emancipation and chose to live independently rather than enter the official system that Moss had sought to protect them from. Sarah Mitchell, the oldest resident, became an unofficial spokesperson for the group during the media attention that followed their discovery. Her articulate defense of Moss and her obvious emotional stability challenged public perceptions about the case. "People want to see this as a simple story of good and evil," she told reporters. "But the real world is more complicated than that. Papa Len took children that nobody else wanted and gave us a chance at real lives." The legal proceedings against Moss were ultimately resolved through a plea agreement that acknowledged both his crimes and his motivations. He pled guilty to multiple counts of kidnapping and concealing deaths, but received a suspended sentence that allowed him to serve his time under house arrest. The agreement also required him to cooperate with child welfare authorities in placing the remaining children in appropriate care situations. The case prompted comprehensive reforms in the state's child welfare system, including improved tracking of children in foster care, better communication between agencies, and enhanced oversight of vulnerable children who might be at risk of falling through bureaucratic cracks. The reforms were named the Roosevelt Elementary Act, in acknowledgement of the systemic failures that had made Moss's operation possible. Dr. Maria Santos, a social work professor who studied the case extensively, noted that Moss's underground community had achieved outcomes that the official foster care system had failed to provide. "While we cannot condone his methods," Dr. Santos wrote in her analysis, "we must acknowledge that Mr. Moss succeeded in providing stability, education, and emotional support to children who had been failed by every official institution designed to help them." The school building was extensively renovated after Moss's underground facility was discovered, with the hidden rooms sealed and the building's security systems upgraded to prevent similar unauthorized modifications. A memorial plaque was installed recognizing the children who had lived beneath the school, acknowledging their experiences while emphasizing the importance of working within legal systems to protect vulnerable children. Foster continued to maintain contact with several of the children who had lived in Moss's care, watching as they adapted to life in mainstream society. The younger children generally adjusted well to traditional homes, while the teenagers faced greater challenges in accepting authority figures other than Moss. The long-term outcomes varied, but most of the children eventually found stability in their new living situations. Leonard Moss recovered partially from his stroke, but remained limited in his mobility and speech. He spent his remaining years under house arrest in the modest home where he had lived alone for decades, receiving regular visits from former residents of his underground community who had become successful adults. He died peacefully in 2019, surrounded by people he had saved from lives of neglect and abuse. The cemetery where Moss had buried the two children who died in his care was converted into a memorial garden maintained by the City Parks Department. The simple headstones were preserved, and the site became a place where former residents could visit to remember friends who had not lived to see adulthood. The garden also served as a reminder of the children who had died while in official foster care during the same period, highlighting the systemic problems that Moss had tried to address. Foster's final report on the case became required reading for social workers and law enforcement officers involved in child protection cases. The report emphasized the importance of looking beyond legal technicalities to consider the actual welfare of children, while also acknowledging that individual vigilante action could not substitute for comprehensive systemic reform. The case study was incorporated into university curricula for social work, criminology, and public policy programs. Students analyzed the ethical complexities of Moss's actions, debating whether his crimes could be justified by their positive outcomes and what alternatives might have been available to achieve similar results through legal means. Several former residents of the underground facility pursued careers in social work, education, and child advocacy, using their experiences to help other vulnerable children navigate official systems more successfully. Their first-hand knowledge of both institutional failures and alternative care models provided unique perspectives that informed policy discussions and reform efforts. The Roosevelt Elementary case remained controversial years after its resolution, with public opinion continuing to divide between those who viewed Moss as a criminal and those who saw him as a hero who had acted when official institutions failed. The complexity of the case resisted simple moral judgments, forcing communities to confront uncomfortable questions about the adequacy of child protection systems and the obligations of individuals who witness systemic failures. Foster often reflected on the paradox that Leonard Moss had committed serious crimes while simultaneously providing better care for vulnerable children than the legal system designed to protect them. The case had challenged her understanding of justice and forced her to consider whether the law always served the interest of those it was meant to protect. The underground facility beneath Roosevelt Elementary became a symbol of both institutional failure and individual compassion, representing the desperate measures that caring adults might take when official systems prove inadequate to protect vulnerable children. The case served as a continuing reminder that child welfare required not just good intentions but effective systems that could actually deliver on their promises of safety and stability. The legacy of Leonard Moss and his hidden community continued to influence discussions about child welfare reform, alternative care models, and the responsibilities of individuals who encounter children in crisis. His story remained a complex testament to the power of human compassion and the dangers of systemic failure, challenging society to find better ways to protect its most vulnerable members.